What's up, St. Teresa's? My name is Chase Crouse. Welcome to St. Teresa's Roundtable. My guest in this 4-part series is our very own Amy Allert. Amy, how's it going?
Doing well, thank you.
Good. So today we're going to talk about the first of 4 in this 4-part series on Catholic social teaching. So Catholic social teaching is a big issue. There's a lot of rabbit holes. We're not going to go into all the rabbit holes because that's a bad idea. I guess before we dive into any kind of particular topic for today, I guess why do you think it's prudent now to talk about Catholic social teaching in our current climate?
I think we have a lot of good reasons to be having this discussion and thinking about some of these big issues that we're facing with the election coming up and with something that none of us have ever dealt with as far as the pandemic. We have tension in our country with race issues, and there's always the ongoing right to life conflicts. And so we have a ton of reasons to be having these conversations. And I think that this is an excellent opportunity for us to perhaps revisit some of the basic things that's a part of our faith. Some of the basic foundations that are a part of our faith that can help us make good decisions. Because I really, truly, with all my heart, think that everyone comes from a place of desiring to do what is right and good for God, for themselves, for their families. And sometimes if you're not sure what the right thing is to do, it makes it really hard to make a good decision. And so, you and I kind of exploring some of these basic foundational principles of Catholic social teaching hopefully will be helpful to those in our community. Yeah,
I think, for me too, it's, I remember growing up, being nominally Catholic, saying like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic, and not really knowing that statement means inherently that you have certain views, whether you know it or not. Like if you're fully practicing your faith, that means you stand on certain ground that's not really debatable, right? But growing up, I remember even when I went to college, people would say things, and looking back on it now, I've been like, wow, yeah, that's totally not a Catholic viewpoint or thing to say, whether they're my Catholic friends or non-Catholic friends. But at the time, I didn't know any better, right? And you just kind of roll with the punches, and you're just like, oh yeah, I think that's like a normal thing to think. Like it's a very normal thing for people to do and say. And so I think for us and for everybody, just knowing these basic principles of like the foundations, like you said, it at least sets you up to have that filter, right? So when information is entering into your brain, you have that filter being like, I don't know if that's right, or that's maybe not quite nuanced enough, or like, that's not exactly, you didn't hit the nail on the head on that one. So that's awesome. So we have a 4-part series, right? So the first thing we're going to talk about today is human dignity. And so that's kind of where we have to start, and we're always going to come back to throughout these episodes. So I guess what's a good starting line definition of like human dignity, or from a Catholic perspective, what do we have to consider before even talking about human dignity, maybe in regards to like faith and all that good stuff?
Sure. And I think I just want to also kind of lay out the framework for what the 4 parts are going to be.
Sure.
So we're going to be the 4 key principles. It's going to be dignity of the human person. It's going to be the common good, solidarity, and subsidiarity. And we're going to break those open and explain what everything means. And then we're also going to, I believe, we're going to spend some time in our 4th session really taking these principles and applying them to some of the current events that are happening in our country.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be fruitful. But back to what you asked, dignity of the human person. I mean, that is absolutely the key point where we start and we come back to every single time. Where does it come from? Our creation. We're created in the image and likeness of God, every human person. And so from that alone, we get our dignity. We don't earn it. It's not what we contribute to the world to deserve it. It's inherently a part of who we are, created in the image and likeness of God.
So I guess we're presupposing faith here, right?
That's a good point.
Our definition of human dignity is inherently a definition from a theistic perspective, somebody who believes that there is a God, right? That kind of spun things into existence, at least, right? Not necessarily the Catholic, our viewpoint of God, but a theistic God. So like there is a God out there. So this definition applies to anybody who believes that there's some higher power, right? Yeah. So we were created in the image of God, so I think
male and female.
Yeah, both of us, just like Genesis 1 and 2 say, right?
Exactly.
So and I think it's important for us and for everybody kind of listening to this to remind ourselves that Catholic social teaching presupposes that you're Catholic, right? So it presupposes that you believe in God, Jesus is risen from the dead, ascended to the right hand of the Father, that he established a church to give us guidance on principles of faith and morals and all that stuff, right? So I think it's important because I think a lot of times well-intentioned Catholics try to just purely rely on reason when it comes to a lot of these issues. And that's a huge part of it, right? But reason builds on faith, right? And faith builds on reason. They're not competitive, right? They work together.
We're again created in his image. We're supposed to use our intellect, but we also are supposed to use our heart. So it's got to be a head and heart thing, not one or the other. It's got to be both.
Yeah, and obviously all inspired by the Holy Spirit. So going back to that definition of the human person, or the human dignity. So you have dignity because of what you are and who you are, not what you do necessarily.
That's so
right?
Important.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I think, some of the issues that we're facing come from the misunderstanding that what you can contribute, what you do, is what gives you your worth and your value. And as Catholics, that is not what we believe.
Yeah, there's a quote I heard. I have no idea who said it. Anyway, but it's basically saying that your ability is a cheap imitation of worth. Because, so oftentimes, especially even when you look at younger generations and older generations too, but how often do you see middle school and high school kids, they fall into this sense of depression or self-loathing because they can't make the team, or they can't get all A's, or fill in the blank here. They're comparing themselves to somebody else and thinking that somehow affects their dignity and their self-worth, because your self-worth isn't contingent on what you can do. You can be an amazing guitarist, but you get in a car accident and you lose your hands, and that doesn't change your dignity, right? You still have dignity. You just can't play guitar anymore, right? And so this also reminds me too of Karol Wojtyła and it's called the personalistic norm. For those who don't know, the personalistic norm, basically it's the definition is it is never okay to use somebody as a means to an end.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's good because they have human dignity, right? So I don't know if you want to speak on that, but just that, I guess that utilitarianism, right? That's a kind of a hot button word for theology of the body and stuff. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Well, again, the dignity of the human person, this key point, is woven throughout the other three key principles that we're going to be talking about. And so, I think of homelessness when you're talking about this. We have members of our society that really aren't contributing in a way that perhaps a lot of people think that they should be. Oftentimes it's because they literally can't. There's a lot of passion and opinions about how we should be helping these members of our society. And I think that in that particular situation, there's so many variables, and remembering that each person is unique. And so lumping together any entity of human persons and saying they're all going to be like this, or it's all because of this, that is a gross misunderstanding of really the true nature of what the circumstances are. The mental illness, the addictions, the circumstances of their lives, abuse, all kinds of things are wrapped up into their circumstance. I'm just speaking of homelessness right now.
Right, yeah.
But no, they're not contributing in that they have a full-time job and they pay their taxes and they have, health insurance. That can be a really frustrating thing for certain people to kind of wrap their heads around and maybe feel empathy, compassion.
Yeah. And it's almost too, it reminds me of almost like a Marxist communist view where people are made to serve the state, right? Not the other way around. You know what I'm saying? So for Marx, literally people were things to be used to advance the state, right? Which goes directly against the personalistic norm. So as Catholics, basically the only form of government that the church has ever said, nope, don't do that, is communism, right? And it's because it's inherently atheistic, one, obviously, so that they literally didn't allow churches to function and shut down churches and killed a lot of people, but also because literally the point of communism is for people to serve the state, right? You only exist to advance the state, right? And so that means they're for sure not looking at the dignity of the human person. And going back to, and looking at this broader perspective here, and this is why, pro-life issues. It's pro-life in every sense of the word, from conception to natural death.
Yes.
That's why we're not just against abortion, we're against euthanasia as well. We're against
the death penalty.
And the death penalty, yeah. And I think a lot of people are confused too, because the church has basically said that the death penalty is always and ever has been the literal last resort. And basically in ancient times, it was because the prisons literally weren't capable of keeping murderers and rapists in, right? So they would then have to use the death penalty to protect the larger human. So
we have a right to protect ourselves.
Exactly, yeah. But in today's culture, we have the technology to stop people, right? So the death penalty isn't strictly necessary, which I think for a lot of Catholics in America who maybe lean more right politically, it kind of ruffles their feathers a little bit, because it's been, they say, well, the church has never disapproved it. And it's like, well, it's always been a last resort. It's been like a necessary thing to do to protect the greater populace. But at the same time, the church has always understood that person has a right to life until they are endangering others and potentially killing other people. Then it's a very last resort. But nowadays we have the technology to do it. So that's why the church has been more open about, listen, like, they have a moment of chance of conversion later in life. So we have the technology to make sure they don't harm anybody again. So let's go with that approach, right? Because even a murderer has human dignity. Absolutely. Now it's less, dignity can grow and, get more dignified, less dignified. You have somebody in jail compared to like the Pope, the dignity of the Pope is,
But they still have an opportunity for conversion.
Yeah, totally.
The Holy Spirit can work in their lives too.
Right.
And hopefully softens their heart and breaks that hardness, so that, at their end, they have just as much of a chance for salvation as the rest of us.
Yeah. And then looking too at like the abortion issues and euthanasia issues. And I think a lot of times those are because we have this weird definition of like persons, where like for some reason this weird modern definition of person, you're a person insofar as you have the ability to choose, right? And which is really just a dumb definition, because if you're asleep, you have no ability to choose. And I can be like, oh, you're asleep, I could kill you. And they'd be like, well, no, they have the potential to choose when they wake up. And I'm like, well, so does the newborn if you give them a couple months, like, or a couple of years, I guess, whatever. And so, and even with euthanasia, it's, while maybe somebody is suffering and dying, it's a really awful, terrible. Anybody who's known anybody who's dying knows it's not fun to be in that situation. But at the same time, the church teaches that you can never remove ordinary means of survival, namely food and water, right? They have a right to food and water. Now, if the extraordinary means are being taken to keep them alive, that's when you can have that conversation, right? Obviously, if somebody has very like obvious chance of survival, like why would you kill them? Like,
So there's distinctions that are really interesting, and there's an awesome institution that we have available to us. It's the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And we'll share a link for that so that people have access to that. And it is a Catholic institution. They have moral theologians on staff, and we actually have access to them 24 hours a day, so that if we're ever in a situation where we really aren't sure, let's say we have a loved one that has begun the dying process, and the doctors are suggesting different forms of medical attention, and we're just not sure, what's the respectful way to allow the dignity of the person through the dying process, or is this ordinary means extraordinary? These questions are big.
Right.
And so we have access to those answers to help us out with that. And the distinction of, when the dying process begins versus when they're still, they're naturally able to still be working towards restored health. It's
tricky,
that's
especially for us who are not doctors.
Right. Doctors, that's a very gray area. So I'm glad to know that we have this resource, and we'll be sharing it with everyone.
Yeah, that's awesome. So basically, all this being said, we have dignity insofar as we're made in the image of God, which is something that can't be taken away. It can never be altered or changed. It's inherent in the fact that you're a human being.
And you know what else I want to add is that sometimes people don't even recognize their own inherent dignity. They don't even know that about themselves. And I think that it's important to mention that as Catholics, we are called to recognize that in every human person, whether they recognize it in themselves or not. And we're called to treat them with dignity and respect, even if they don't necessarily treat themselves the same way.
That's awesome. So our conversation, while it's been brief, it's the kind of the goal of this too is to stir up questions and make people think and kind of prod, kind of poke the bear. You know what I'm saying? So kind of transitioning here. So if you're watching this at home, and if we just talked a lot about human dignity and you're still like, I have a lot of questions. You said this. Can you clarify? One, you can always reach out to Amy or I. We're always available. Emails are on the parish website. If you're looking for resources, we're going to share that link to that. What was it? The
National Catholic Bioethics Center.
National Catholic Bioethics Center. But also, if you're looking for just reading, if you're a nerd like me, there's a book called Church, State, and Society. It's fantastic. Also, there's the Bible and the Catechism. You should buy and read those if you don't know them. Anyway, so this is a great book about this as well. So next episode, we're going to be talking about the common good, kind of what that means and how to break that down a little bit too. And then from there, we're going to keep going. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free. We'd love to answer any questions you might have to the best of our ability. And we'll see you next time, St. Teresa's.